Hey everybody, it's Party Elite with a beginner's guide to Total War Warhammer. In this video, I want to discuss the concept of defeat in detail. As a tactic, this is a lot more fluid in how it must be set up compared to the retreating kill box or the fire and retreat motions, so the examples I provide are to instigate a line of thinking as opposed to exact actions. This is an approach that is especially worth taking when you're outnumbered and retreat is not an option, though it also works great if your opponent has fielded units that are capable of effectively countering yours when working in tandem. It's important to understand the structure of a standard army. It may seem obvious, but a well-rounded army is composed of units that support each other to effectively defeat whatever the enemy might field. An army is not one entity, it is several smaller entities put together. Defeat in detail involves taking these entities apart and defeating them one at a time, removing support structures to dismantle the enemy army as a whole. Even in a more traditional battle, it's all about identifying these support structures and giving them value based on your own army. For example, if you're fielding a cavalry-heavy army, the enemy's anti-large units are a very potent threat. Rather than focusing on the anti-large units from the get-go, however, take a look at what you have that will take care of them and what they have that will support them. For example, if these anti-large units are supported by artillery that prevents infantry from charging down the field, are you able to isolate the artillery? Can you bait your enemy to split his army into parts, giving your cavalry a chance to swoop in and interrupt the artillery support? Consider engagement time and order. Unchecked, the enemy artillery will be able to fire at your infantry all the way down the field as they run towards the enemy. Meanwhile, if your cavalry has entangled the enemy artillery, the enemy's anti-large units need to march possibly a fair distance before they'll be able to hurt your cavalry. This buys you ample time to push forward with your infantry and pull your cavalry back in the nick of time. In an ideal world, you can completely remove all enemy artillery from play first, giving you control of the battlefield. Now your infantry has nothing to worry about and your cavalry doesn't have to be pulled into dangerous engagements. Now imagine you're facing a largely ethereal army. They are resistant to physical damage, but you, wisely, knowing there was a high chance of these types of units on the field of course, brought a spellcaster that can destroy them with relative ease. If you send your spellcaster in as a part of your larger army, the ethereal units can tear your soldiers apart as your caster gets to work. Some very serious damage, both physical and psychological, can be done before your caster is able to get anything done. But if you send your spellcaster in on their own, they might get caught out by enemy flying units or cavalry. Are you able to bait these units out with your own high mobility units? Can a unit of cavalry bait a Terrorgeist out of its position, for example, allowing your spellcaster to fly in, drop a spell, and leave? Again, think about the time to engagement and amount of damage done. You can sacrifice a cheap cavalry unit if it means the core threat in the enemy army is severely damaged as a result. Finally, keep in mind that this allows you to use an outnumbered force efficiently by splitting the enemy up into smaller, more manageable chunks. Your elite dwarf army might be up against a greenskin horde, but if you're able to bait the enemy in parts or engage them piecemeal, you might outnumber and outmatch each of these pieces on their own, resulting in an overarching victory. Typically, this is the more traditional definition of defeat in detail, bringing a large portion of your own forces down on a smaller portion of the enemy in order to quickly remove them from the equation. Of course, when working with magic and mechanics of a game, there are ways to adapt that same theory as I've described in this video. Defeat in detail is a tactic that has a multitude of variants depending on the battlefield situation. Despite that level of variety, the concept is simple at its core. Separate the enemy into smaller parts and defeat them one at a time. It takes a great deal of micromanagement, patience, and time management, but it can lead to some interesting battles, ones that confuse an opponent that expects you to follow the norm. You need to know how to use your army as a whole, of course, but you also need to know when to split it into parts and how to split the enemy into parts. Even when outnumbered or outclassed, the enemy can be dismantled and destroyed, and that's what being a great general is about. For more tips and tricks, subscribe to this channel, and if there's something you'd like to see covered, let me know in the comments below.